17-year-old Abigail stands frozen at gate 23, surrounded by 5 security officers and 3 airline managers. Her hand trembles as she extends a small leather wallet toward the red-faced supervisor who just called her a liar. Inside that wallet lies something that will shatter every assumption they made about this black teenager in worn sneakers. Before we dive into what happens next, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. If you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of how they look, go ahead and hit that like button. Subscribe and turn on notifications because stories like this need to be heard. Now, let's go back to where this nightmare began. 2 weeks before that devastating moment at Denver International Airport, Abigail was sitting in her cramped bedroom on the south side of Chicago, staring at a letter that would change her life. The envelope bore the Stanford University seal, and inside was an invitation to participate in the Future Legal Minds program, a week-long intensive workshop designed for the nation's brightest high school students interested in law. The program promised workshops with Supreme Court justices, observation of real courtroom proceedings, and most importantly, the potential for a full-ride scholarship to Stanford's undergraduate program. For a girl like Abigail, this wasn't just an opportunity. It was everything. Abigail had worked relentlessly for this moment. Maintaining a perfect 4.0 grade point average while serving as president of her school's debate club wasn't easy, especially when she had to help her mother, Ada, with household responsibilities every evening. Ada worked 2 jobs just to keep their small apartment and put food on the table. Every morning at 5, she left for her shift as a hotel housekeeper downtown, scrubbing toilets and changing sheets for guests who never looked her in the eye. Every evening at 6, she started her second shift as a supermarket cashier, standing on aching feet until midnight, scanning groceries and forcing smiles at customers who sometimes treated her like she was invisible. Abigail's father had died when she was 10, leaving behind medical debt that still haunted them 7 years later. The Stanford letter represented hope, but it also represented an impossible challenge. The program was free, but getting there wasn't. A plane ticket from Chicago to San Francisco cost $350, money they simply didn't have. Abigail watched her mother read the letter 3 times, saw the way Ada's eyes filled with tears, saw the way her jaw clenched with determination. Within 48 hours, Ada had borrowed $100 from her coworker Maria, another $100 from her cousin in Indiana, and sold their 13-inch television for $90 at a pawn shop. She put together the rest from her meager savings, buying a prepaid debit card to book the ticket online because they didn't have a credit card. The morning Abigail left for the airport, Ada woke up at 3 to make her daughter breakfast. They sat together in their tiny kitchen, eating scrambled eggs in silence, both trying not to cry. Ada packed Abigail's clothes in an old cloth bag, folding each item carefully, tucking in a family photo and a handwritten note that said, "You are worthy of every dream you chase." The only luggage Abigail had was a faded blue backpack that had seen her through 4 years of high school and a canvas tote bag with a broken zipper. Ada pressed a small envelope into her daughter's hand containing $50 in cash for food and emergencies. "Make it last," she whispered, knowing $50 wouldn't go far in California. At O'Hare International Airport, Ada walked Abigail as far as security would allow. She held her daughter's face in both hands and said, "You're going to show them what we're made of. Don't let anybody make you feel small." Abigail nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat, and walked toward the security checkpoint. She turned back once to wave, seeing her mother standing there in her worn work uniform, and that image burned itself into her memory. Getting through TSA security was nerve-wracking. Abigail had never flown before, didn't know the rules about liquids or electronics. A male TSA agent with cold eyes watched her struggle to remove her laptop from her backpack, watched her fumble with her worn sneakers. His gaze lingered on her a few seconds too long, and she felt the weight of his suspicion even though she had done nothing wrong. But he eventually waved her through. Sitting at her gate, waiting to board, Abigail pulled out the Stanford letter one more time, reading it to reassure herself this was real. Tucked behind it in her backpack was another document, one she never showed anyone unless absolutely necessary. It was sealed in a brown envelope marked, "Confidential." Cook County Juvenile Court, and it represented another part of her life that most people would never understand. She pushed it deeper into her bag and tried to focus on the excitement of the journey ahead, completely unaware that within hours, everything would fall apart. Boarding the plane felt surreal. Abigail found her seat near the back of the aircraft, settling into the narrow space by the window. The seat beside her remained empty until the final boarding call, when a white woman in her 50s rushed down the aisle, huffing with annoyance. Her name was Adelaide, and everything about her screamed money: the tailored navy blazer, the Louis Vuitton handbag, the diamond studs glinting in her ears, the subtle scent of expensive perfume. Adelaide glanced at her seat assignment, then at Abigail, and her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. It was a look Abigail had seen countless times before, a mixture of surprise and displeasure, as if Adelaide hadn't expected to sit next to someone who looked like Abigail. Adelaide placed her designer bag on the seat first, taking her time arranging it before finally sitting down. She made a point of pulling her bag closer to her body, away from where Abigail's backpack rested near her feet. The gesture was subtle but unmistakable. When Abigail's bag accidentally brushed against Adelaide's during takeoff turbulence, the older woman jerked away as if she'd been burned, yanking her purse into her lap and muttering just loud enough to be heard, "Some people don't know how to respect other people's space." Abigail felt her face grow hot with embarrassment and anger, but she said nothing. She had learned early that responding to these microaggressions often made things worse. When the flight attendant came around with the beverage cart, Adelaide ordered a glass of red wine and a turkey sandwich without hesitation, speaking to the attendant with casual familiarity. The flight attendant, a white man in his early 30s named Aaron, smiled pleasantly at Adelaide and promised to bring her order right away. When he turned to Abigail, the smile vanished. His eyes scanned her worn clothing, her scuffed sneakers, her nervous hands clutching her phone. "What can I get you?" he asked in a flat, disinterested tone. Abigail had been on edge all morning and was incredibly thirsty. "Could I please have a cup of water?" she asked politely. Aaron's eyebrows rose slightly. "Water is $3. Cash or card?" Abigail blinked in confusion. She had assumed water was complimentary on flights. Her face must have shown her surprise because Aaron's expression hardened. "Not on this airline, sweetheart. You pay or you don't get anything." The condescension in his voice, the way he called her sweetheart like she was a child who didn't understand basic economics, made her stomach twist. She fumbled in her pocket for the envelope her mother had given her, pulling out a $5 bill. Aaron snatched it from her hand without a word, disappeared for a moment, then returned with a tiny plastic cup half filled with lukewarm water and slapped 2 crumpled dollar bills onto her tray table. "No thank you, no smile, nothing." Meanwhile, Adelaide was sipping wine from an actual glass and eating her sandwich without having produced any money at all. The rest of the flight was torture. Abigail tried to focus on the clouds outside her window, tried to review her notes for the Stanford program on her phone, but Adelaide made it impossible to relax. The woman spent 20 minutes on a phone call, speaking loudly enough for half the plane to hear. "I don't understand why they let just anyone fly these days," Adelaide complained to whoever was on the other end. "The standards have really dropped. You used to know you'd be sitting with a certain caliber of people, but now it's just a free-for-all." She glanced sideways at Abigail as she said this, making sure the message was received. Abigail's hands shook as she pulled out her backpack to distract herself. Inside, among her carefully folded clothes and toiletries, was the Stanford acceptance letter and her birth certificate, the only form of identification she had since she was too young for a driver's license and had never needed a state ID card. And beneath those documents, hidden in a zippered pocket, was the brown envelope from Cook County Juvenile Court. She checked to make sure it was still sealed, still safe, then quickly closed her bag. That envelope contained something precious and private, something that represented months of hard work and accomplishment, but she knew from experience that people made assumptions. They saw "juvenile court" and immediately thought the worst. When the plane began its descent into Denver, where Abigail had a 3-hour layover before her connecting flight to San Francisco, Adelaide stood up the moment the seatbelt sign turned off. In her haste, her purse caught on the armrest and tipped over, spilling its contents into the aisle. Lipstick, a wallet, reading glasses, breath mints, and loose receipts scattered everywhere. Abigail instinctively bent down to help, gathering the items closest to her feet. She picked up Adelaide's wallet, intending to hand it back, but before she could straighten up, Adelaide shrieked, "Don't touch my things. I know what you're trying to do." The accusation hung in the air like poison. Every passenger within earshot turned to stare. Adelaide snatched her wallet from Abigail's outstretched hand, clutching it to her chest as if she'd just prevented a robbery. Aaron, the flight attendant, appeared immediately, positioning himself between Abigail and Adelaide. "Miss, please stay in your seat until everyone deplanes," he said firmly, his eyes locked on Abigail. Not Adelaide, who had caused the scene. Not Adelaide, who had made the accusation. Just Abigail, the black girl who had dared to offer help. Abigail sank back into her seat, her eyes burning with humiliation. Around her, she could hear the whispers starting. "Did you see that? I knew something was off about her. She doesn't belong here." She sat frozen, gripping the armrests, fighting back tears as passenger after passenger filed past, some glancing at her with suspicion, others with pity, none with understanding. When the plane finally emptied, she gathered her belongings with shaking hands and walked off the aircraft, feeling the weight of Aaron's judgmental stare on her back the entire way. Denver International Airport stretched out before Abigail like a maze of bright lights and polished floors. She checked her phone for the gate number of her connecting flight, Gate 23, nearly half a mile away. Her legs felt like lead after the tense flight, but she forced herself to walk, rolling her shoulders to release the knots of stress. She had 3 hours until boarding, plenty of time to find some food, use the restroom, and maybe find a quiet corner to review her Stanford materials one more time. She just wanted to disappear for a while, to escape the feeling of being watched and judged. She found a seating area near Gate 23 and claimed a spot in the corner, away from the crowds. Her stomach was growling loudly enough that the man sitting 2 seats away glanced over with concern. Abigail realized she hadn't eaten since those scrambled eggs her mother made that morning, and it was now past 2 in the afternoon. She counted the remaining money in her envelope, $32. After the water on the plane, this was all she had left for the entire week in California. She needed to be careful. But hunger won out over caution, and she walked to a nearby food court, settling on the cheapest option she could find. A small pre-packaged sandwich and a bottle of water for $9. The cashier, a young woman with bright pink hair, looked at Abigail's wrinkled $20 bill with suspicion, holding it up to the light as if checking for counterfeit marks. Abigail wanted to scream that it was real money, hard-earned money, money her mother had sacrificed for, but she bit her tongue and waited in silence. Returning to her seat, Abigail unwrapped the sandwich and pulled out her folder of Stanford documents. She wanted to memorize the schedule, to prepare mentally for meeting judges and lawyers who could change her future. But as she ate, she became aware of eyes on her. 3 middle-aged white women sitting across the gate area were staring at her, not even trying to hide it. They leaned toward each other, whispering behind cupped hands, their gazes flicking from Abigail's face to her worn backpack to her scuffed shoes and back again. One of them, a woman with short blonde hair wearing a blue blazer, seemed particularly interested. Her name tag from some corporate conference was still pinned to her jacket, Adriana Mitchell, Vice President of Operations. Adriana's whispers to her companions grew more animated, and at one point, she pulled out her phone and appeared to take a photo in Abigail's direction. Abigail tried to ignore them, focusing on her papers, but the women's scrutiny made her skin crawl. What were they saying about her? What had she done to warrant such attention? She was just a teenager sitting quietly, eating a sandwich, minding her own business. But apparently, that wasn't enough. After about 15 minutes of observation, Adriana stood up decisively, smoothed down her blazer, and marched over to the customer service desk near the gate. Abigail watched with growing dread as Adriana spoke to a male airline employee behind the counter, gesturing repeatedly in her direction. The employee, whose name tag read Abel Harrison, senior gate agent, listened intently, nodding with a grave expression. He looked over at Abigail several times during the conversation, his eyes narrowing with each glance. Abel was a man in his early 50s with gray hair and the bearing of someone who took his authority very seriously. After Adriana finished speaking, he picked up a phone, made a brief call, then set it down and stepped out from behind the counter. He walked directly toward Abigail with purpose, and her heart began to race. What was happening? Had she done something wrong? Abel stopped in front of her, looming over where she sat, and said in a voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "Excuse me, miss. I need to see your boarding pass and identification. Now." The command was so sudden, so aggressive, that Abigail froze for a moment. "I'm sorry, what?" she managed to say, her voice coming out smaller than she intended. Abel's expression hardened. "Your boarding pass and ID. I need to verify your travel documents." His tone suggested he expected resistance, expected trouble. Abigail's hands trembled as she unlocked her phone to pull up her digital boarding pass. She handed the phone to Abel, then dug into her backpack for her birth certificate, the only form of identification she had brought. Abel took the laminated certificate, studied it with exaggerated care, then looked at Abigail with undisguised skepticism. "This is your only ID? No driver's license? No state identification card? No student ID?" Abigail explained that she was 17, too young to have obtained her driver's license yet, and that she had accidentally left her school ID at home in her rush to pack. Abel's eyebrows rose as if she had just confirmed his worst suspicions. "So you're traveling alone, as a minor, with only a birth certificate? That's highly unusual." The way he said "unusual" made it sound like suspicious. He continued, "Where are you traveling to, and what's the purpose of your trip?" Abigail explained about Stanford, about the Future Legal Minds program, about the scholarship opportunity. With each word, Abel's skepticism seemed to grow rather than diminish. When she finished, he actually laughed, a short, harsh sound. "Stanford? A scholarship program? You?" The disbelief in his voice was like a slap across the face. Abigail felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. "Yes, Stanford. I was invited. I can show you the letter." She reached into her backpack again, pulling out the official acceptance letter with the Stanford seal. Abel snatched it from her hands, reading it slowly while Abigail waited, barely breathing. After what felt like an eternity, Abel handed it back with a dismissive shake of his head. "This could be fake. Anyone with a computer and a printer can make something that looks official. How do I know you didn't create this yourself?" The accusation hung in the air between them. Around them, passengers had stopped what they were doing to watch the confrontation. Some looked concerned, others looked curious, but none stepped forward to help. Abel pulled out his radio and spoke into it quietly, and within minutes, 2 airport security officers appeared. One was a tall black man named Abraham Williams, the other a petite white woman named Adelaide Foster. The irony of her sharing a name with the awful woman from the plane wasn't lost on Abigail, and she almost laughed hysterically at the absurdity of it all. But there was nothing funny about the way these 2 officers flanked her, their hands resting casually on their belts near their weapons. Abraham spoke first, his voice neutral but firm. "Miss, we've received a report of suspicious activity. We're going to need you to come with us to answer some questions." It wasn't a request. It was an order. They led Abigail to a small room tucked behind the customer service desk, away from the public eye. It wasn't exactly an interrogation room, but it felt like one, windowless, with harsh fluorescent lighting and uncomfortable plastic chairs arranged around a small table. Abel followed them in, along with Adriana, the woman who had started this entire nightmare. Adriana positioned herself near the door as if to prevent Abigail from escaping, her arms crossed, her expression one of grim satisfaction. Abraham gestured for Abigail to sit, and she did, her backpack clutched in her lap like a shield. Adelaide, the security officer, pulled out a notebook and pen, preparing to document everything. Abraham began the questioning, his tone professional but cold. "What's your full name?" Abigail answered, "Abigail Rose Thompson." "Date of birth?" "March 14, 2007. "Home address?" She gave her address on the south side of Chicago, watching as Adelaide wrote everything down. Abraham continued, "Who purchased your plane ticket, and how was it paid for?" Abigail explained that her mother had bought the ticket using a prepaid debit card, money she had borrowed and saved. Adelaide looked up from her notes, exchanging a meaningful glance with Abraham. "Your mother borrowed money to buy you a plane ticket to California? That's an expensive trip for someone who needs to borrow money. Why would she do that?" The question was phrased as if caring about your child's future was somehow suspicious. Abigail explained again about the Stanford program, about the scholarship opportunity, about how her mother worked 2 jobs to support them and had sacrificed everything for this chance. But instead of understanding, she saw doubt growing in their eyes. Adelaide leaned forward, her voice taking on a false gentleness that was somehow more insulting than outright hostility. "Sweetheart, I understand you might be scared right now, but we need you to tell us the truth. Are you running away from home? Are you in some kind of trouble? You can tell us. We're here to help." The implication was clear. They didn't believe her story, didn't believe a black girl from the South Side could legitimately be invited to Stanford, didn't believe her mother would sacrifice for her education. They believed something else entirely, something darker. Abigail felt panic rising in her chest. "I'm not running away," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm not in trouble. I'm just trying to get to school. Please, you can call Stanford and verify everything. You can call my mother. This is all a misunderstanding." Abraham shook his head slowly. "We'll get to that. First, I need to understand something. You say you're 17, traveling alone, with only a birth certificate for ID. You say your mother borrowed money to buy a last-minute ticket with a prepaid card. You say you're going to Stanford for a scholarship program. Do you understand how many red flags that raises?" "Red flags." That phrase again. Abigail realized with sinking horror that nothing she said would matter. They had already decided she was guilty of something, and now they were just gathering evidence to support their predetermined conclusion. Abel, who had been standing silently near the door, chimed in, "I've been working in this industry for 20 years. I can spot a liar when I see one. Something about your story doesn't add up, young lady. I think you're hiding something." Adriana nodded vigorously in agreement. "I've been watching her for the past hour," she added, speaking as if Abigail weren't even in the room. She looked nervous, constantly checking her phone, glancing around like she was afraid of being caught. That's not normal behavior for an innocent traveler. Abigail wanted to scream that of course she looked nervous, she had never flown alone before, had never been away from home, was worried about missing her connection, was anxious about making a good impression at Stanford. But apparently, being nervous while black was evidence of criminal intent. Adelaide, the officer, suggested, "We should try calling her mother again." They dialed Ada's number, and Abigail prayed her mother would answer this time. But Ada was still at work, her phone locked away per hotel policy, and the call went straight to voicemail. Adelaide announced this to the room as if it proved something sinister. No answer. That's convenient. Abraham added, "We'll keep trying, but in the meantime, Miss Thompson, you're going to need to stay here while we investigate further." Abigail's mind raced. Her flight to San Francisco was boarding in less than 2 hours. If they kept her here much longer, she would miss it. If she missed it, she would miss the first day of the Stanford program. Everything she had worked for, everything her mother had sacrificed for, would be ruined. "Please," she begged, hating how desperate she sounded but unable to stop herself. "Please, I haven't done anything wrong. I need to make my flight. I need to get to California. This program only happens once. If I miss it, I lose the scholarship opportunity." Abel pulled up something on his computer tablet, then turned it toward Abraham. "I checked our system. Her ticket was purchased 3 days ago with a prepaid Visa gift card. Those cards are commonly used for fraudulent transactions and by people trying to hide their identity. Another red flag." He looked at Abigail accusingly. "Where exactly did your mother get this prepaid card? Who gave it to her?" Abigail explained once again that her mother had collected borrowed money from friends, taken it to a drugstore, purchased the prepaid card, and used it to book the ticket online because they didn't have a credit card. To her, this was a story of determination and love. To them, it was evidence of criminality. Then Adriana, emboldened by her role as concerned citizen, spoke up again. "I think there's something else going on here. I've seen the news stories. Young girls, especially vulnerable ones from poor neighborhoods, being lured across the country with promises of opportunities that don't exist. What if she's being trafficked? What if someone gave her that ticket and that fake Stanford letter to get her to California for other purposes?" The room went silent. Abigail felt the blood drain from her face. They thought she was a victim of human trafficking. They thought she was too stupid, too naive, too desperate to recognize a scam. The insult of it, the sheer audacity of it, left her speechless. Abraham stood up, his expression grave. "That's a serious possibility we need to consider. Miss Thompson, if someone is forcing you to take this trip, if someone has threatened you or your family, you need to tell us now. We can protect you, but only if you're honest with us." Abigail shook her head violently, tears now streaming down her face despite her best efforts to hold them back. "No one is forcing me. No one threatened us. I earned this opportunity. I worked for it. Why won't you believe me?" But she already knew the answer. They wouldn't believe her because of who she was, because of where she came from, because of the color of her skin. No amount of explaining would change their minds because the problem wasn't her story. The problem was their prejudice. "Before we find out what happens next, I need to ask you something. If you think these officers and airline staff were completely out of line, comment number 1 right now. And if you've ever experienced discrimination like this, or if you know someone who has, hit that like button in solidarity with Abigail. Subscribe because her story is far from over, and you won't want to miss what she does next. Now here's what I want to know: what would you have done in Abigail's position? Would you have kept your cool, or would you have demanded a lawyer? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And will that mysterious envelope from the juvenile court save her, or will it make everything worse? Let's find out. Abraham made the decision to escalate. He stepped out of the room briefly, spoke into his radio, and within 10 minutes, 2 Denver airport police officers arrived. The first was Officer Adam Clark, a tall white man with broad shoulders and a stern expression that suggested he had seen everything and trusted no one. The second was Officer Adrian Martinez, younger and slightly less intimidating, but still projecting an aura of authority. They entered the small room, assessed the situation with quick professional glances, and Adam immediately took charge. "All right, what do we have here?" he asked Abraham, not Abigail. As if she weren't capable of speaking for herself. Abraham provided a summary that made Abigail sound like a master criminal: minor traveling alone, suspicious ticket purchase, questionable identification, implausible story about Stanford scholarship, possible runaway or trafficking victim, uncooperative attitude. Each word was a knife, cutting away at Abigail's dignity. Adam listened with his arms crossed, nodding occasionally, his eyes occasionally flicking to Abigail with assessment. When Abraham finished, Adam approached Abigail directly, standing over her in a way that felt deliberately intimidating. Young lady, we've received some concerning reports about your travel circumstances. I need you to understand the seriousness of this situation. If you're involved in any illegal activity, or if you're in danger, now is the time to speak up. Things will go much easier for you if you cooperate. Abigail lifted her head, meeting his eyes despite her fear. Her voice was shaky but determined. Officer, I've told them everything already. I'm 17 years old. I'm a high school senior from Chicago. I have a 4.0 GPA. I'm president of my debate club. I won a national legal scholarship competition, which is how I got invited to the Stanford program. My mother works 2 jobs to support us. She borrowed money from friends to buy me this plane ticket because she believes in my future. That's the truth. That's the whole truth. I don't know what else to say to make you believe me. Adam's expression didn't change. If that's all true, then you should have documentation to support it. Certificates, letters, school records, something beyond a piece of paper anyone could print from their home computer. Adrian, the younger officer, interjected more gently, do you have anything else in your bag? Anything that might help verify your identity or your story? Abigail hesitated. She did have something else, but it was private, confidential, something she had never wanted to share outside of specific circumstances. But what choice did she have now? She reached into her backpack with trembling hands, past her clothes and toiletries, to the zippered interior pocket. Her fingers found the brown envelope, the one marked, confidential, Cook County Juvenile Court. She pulled it out slowly, clutching it to her chest. Adam's sharp eyes immediately fixed on the envelope, specifically on those words, juvenile court. His entire demeanor shifted, hardening even further. What's that? Are you in legal trouble? Do you have a criminal record? The questions came rapid fire, accusatory. Abigail shook her head frantically. No, it's not like that. It's not criminal. It's something else. Adam held out his hand. I need to see what's in that envelope. Now. Abigail pulled it closer to her body protectively. It's personal. It's confidential. You don't have the right to look at it. Adam's jaw tightened. Actually, when there's reasonable suspicion of illegal activity involving a minor, we do have the right to examine any documents in your possession. You can either open it voluntarily, or I can obtain the authority to open it anyway. Your choice. Abigail felt trapped. Abel, still present and clearly enjoying the drama, added his opinion, if you have nothing to hide, just show them. Unless that envelope proves you've been lying this whole time. The implication was clear. Refusal would be taken as guilt. Adriana chimed in from her spot by the door, I told you something wasn't right about her. Now we know why. She has a juvenile record. This whole Stanford story is obviously fake. Abigail wanted to scream that they were wrong, that they understood nothing, but the words caught in her throat. Adelaide, the security officer, added in a tone of false concern, sweetheart, if you're in trouble with the courts, that's even more reason to be honest with us. Maybe we can help you. But Abigail knew better. These people weren't interested in helping her. They were interested in confirming their prejudices, in proving they had been right to suspect her all along. Adrian tried a different approach, his voice softer, listen, I can see you're scared. But we're all just trying to do our jobs here. If that envelope contains something that explains your situation, something that clears up these questions, then it's in your best interest to show us. Wouldn't you rather resolve this now than miss your flight? That last sentence was the manipulation that broke through her resistance. Miss her flight. Lose Stanford. Lose everything. She couldn't let that happen. Just then, a new person entered the room, escalating the situation even further. Aidan Walsh, the airline's shift supervisor, had been called in to make executive decisions about whether Abigail would be permitted to fly. Aidan was a man in his late 40s, impeccably dressed in a black suit, with the kind of confidence that came from years of authority. He carried a tablet and immediately began reviewing the notes Abel had compiled. After a minute of reading, he looked up at Abigail with cold assessment. "Miss Thompson, I've reviewed your case. Based on the information provided by my staff and security, I'm prepared to recommend that we deny you boarding and report this incident to both TSA and the FBI for further investigation. Traveling under potentially fraudulent circumstances, possible identity theft, suspicious financial transactions, and now evidence of juvenile court involvement. This is serious." The words hit Abigail like physical blows. FBI investigation. Deny boarding. Everything was spiraling completely out of control. She looked around the room at all the faces staring at her with suspicion, judgment, and in some cases, satisfaction. Adriana looked vindicated. Abel looked smug. The security officers looked stern. The police officers looked impatient. And she, Abigail Rose Thompson, 17 years old, honor student, youth advocate, future lawyer, sat in the center of it all, being treated like a criminal for the crime of being young, black, and ambitious. "This isn't fair," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't do anything wrong. I'm just trying to go to school. Why is that so hard to believe?" But she knew why. She had seen it her entire life, had witnessed it in the courtrooms where she volunteered, had felt it in the way store security followed her through stores, the way teachers sometimes looked surprised by her intelligence, the way people like Adelaide on the plane and Adriana in the airport looked at her and saw only stereotypes. The system was designed to doubt people like her, to question their achievements, to assume the worst. Adriana, emboldened by Aiden's arrival, addressed the room. "I think we all know what's really happening here. This girl probably stole someone's identity, used stolen credit card information to book a ticket, and is using fake documents to try to travel across the country. Maybe she's running from the law. Maybe she's being used by criminals. Either way, she doesn't belong on a plane." The casual cruelty of those words, delivered with such certainty, such righteousness, nearly broke Abigail completely. Adelaide the security officer added, "Some people think they can get away with anything these days. But we see through it." Adam the police officer delivered what felt like an ultimatum. "Miss Thompson, this is your last opportunity. Open that envelope and show us what's inside, or we're taking you to airport holding while we sort this out. And I can guarantee you'll miss your flight, miss your program, and possibly face charges for obstruction and providing false information to law enforcement. Your choice. Make it now." The clock on the wall showed that her flight would begin boarding in 45 minutes. 45 minutes to salvage everything. 45 minutes to prove she was telling the truth. Abigail looked down at the brown envelope in her hands. Inside was something she had earned, something she was proud of, but also something that made her vulnerable. Once she showed them, there would be no taking it back. They would know. They would judge. But what other option did she have? Her hands shook as she slowly opened the sealed flap, the sound of tearing paper loud in the tense silence. She reached inside and pulled out 2 items, a plastic ID card and an official letter on court letterhead. And everything changed. The plastic ID card was approximately the size of a credit card, with official seals and security features embedded in the laminate. Abigail's photo stared back from the left side, taken when she was 16, her expression serious and professional. Across the top in bold letters, Cook County Juvenile Court, State of Illinois. Below that, in slightly smaller font, Appointed Youth Advocate. The card displayed her full name, date of birth, and a unique identification number. At the bottom were the signatures of both the presiding judge and the clerk of courts, along with an expiration date showing the credential was current. The card looked official because it was official, issued by one of the largest court systems in the United States. The letter that accompanied the ID was printed on official Cook County Court stationery, complete with watermarks and security features designed to prevent forgery. It was dated 6 months prior and addressed, "To whom it may concern." The letter, signed by juvenile court judge Aileen Morrison, explained that Abigail Rose Thompson had been selected through a competitive application process to serve as an appointed youth advocate in the Cook County juvenile court system. The program, according to the letter, was a pilot initiative designed to give exceptionally talented high school students interested in law the opportunity to work directly with families navigating the juvenile justice system. Abigail had undergone an extensive vetting process that included interviews with 3 sitting judges, a complete FBI background check, psychological evaluation, and 6 months of intensive training in court procedures, family law, child welfare policy, and advocacy techniques. The letter detailed Abigail's responsibilities. She was authorized to attend juvenile court proceedings, provide input to judges regarding the best interests of minor children in custody and welfare cases, conduct interviews with families under court supervision, and prepare written recommendations for judicial consideration. She had clearance to access confidential case files, to be present during sensitive proceedings, and to work with court-appointed attorneys. The letter emphasized that only 10 students in the entire state of Illinois were selected for this program each year, chosen based on academic excellence, demonstrated commitment to justice, and exceptional maturity. Abigail had been working in this capacity for 8 months and had, according to Judge Morrison's letter, demonstrated extraordinary insight, compassion, and professionalism beyond her years, assisting in 43 cases and earning the respect of every attorney, social worker, and judicial officer with whom she has worked. Adam the police officer took the ID card from Abigail's trembling hand, examining it closely under the harsh fluorescent light. He turned it over, checking the holographic seal, running his thumb across the embossed surface. Adrian read the letter, his eyes scanning each line carefully, his expression shifting from skepticism to surprise to something that might have been embarrassment. The room had fallen completely silent except for the rustle of paper and the hum of air conditioning. Abel leaned over Adam's shoulder, squinting at the ID, his confident smirk beginning to fade. Aiden took the letter from Adrian, reading it twice, his jaw tightening with each paragraph. Adelaide the security officer broke the silence first. This looks legitimate. But how? She's 17. How is she working for a court? Abigail, finding her voice again despite the tears streaming down her face, spoke clearly. It's a pilot program. I was nominated by my debate coach, went through 4 rounds of interviews, submitted a 30-page application, and underwent a background check that took 3 months. I've been working at the courthouse every Tuesday and Thursday after school, and all day Saturdays, for the past 8 months. I've helped families understand their rights, helped parents navigate the system, helped kids who had no one else to speak for them. That's what I do. That's who I am. And you assumed I was a criminal. Adam pulled out his phone, dialing the number printed on the court letterhead. The room waited in uncomfortable silence as he spoke with someone on the other end, providing Abigail's ID number and requesting verification. The conversation lasted nearly 5 minutes, during which Adam's expression grew increasingly serious. He asked questions, listened intently, said "I understand" several times, and finally, "Thank you for clarifying." When he ended the call, he set his phone down carefully on the table and looked at Abigail with an expression that was impossible to read. "I just spoke with Judge Morrison's clerk. Everything checks out. She's legitimate. The program is real. The ID is authentic. They confirmed she's one of their most valued advocates." He paused, then added quietly, "The clerk also mentioned that Judge Morrison herself specifically praised Miss Thompson as one of the most brilliant young legal minds she's encountered in her 20 years on the bench." The atmosphere in the room transformed instantly. The aggressive certainty that had dominated the interrogation evaporated, replaced by uncomfortable silence and averted eyes. Adrian set the letter down gently, as if it might break, and took a step back. Abel's face flushed red, and he suddenly found the floor very interesting. Aiden placed the ID card on the table with careful deliberation, his earlier confidence completely gone. Only Adriana seemed resistant to accepting reality, her arms still crossed, her expression still suspicious, but even she had stopped talking. Abigail stood up slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She reached across the table and took back her ID card and letter, holding them protectively. When she spoke, her voice was no longer shaking. It was steady, clear, and filled with controlled anger. "You saw a black girl with an old backpack and immediately decided I was lying. You didn't believe my Stanford acceptance letter. You didn't believe my mother works 2 jobs to support me. You didn't believe I could earn a scholarship. You didn't even try to verify my story before dragging me in here and treating me like a criminal. You just assumed." Abel tried to interrupt. "Now wait just a minute, this wasn't about." But Abigail cut him off, her years of debate training and court experience giving her the ability to speak with authority. Don't you dare say this wasn't about race. Did you interrogate any white passengers today? Did you question any white teenagers about their tickets? Did you demand they prove their scholarships weren't fake? Did you pull any white girls into a room and threaten them with FBI investigations? The silence that followed was answer enough. Adelaide attempted to salvage the situation. "We were just following protocol. When there are red flags." Abigail interrupted again, her voice rising. "Red flags? What red flags exactly? A prepaid debit card? My mother doesn't have a credit card because we're poor. Does being poor make me suspicious? Being 17 and traveling alone? Thousands of teenagers fly alone every day. Having a birth certificate instead of a driver's license? I'm not old enough to drive yet. Which of those things would have been a red flag if I were white?" Adriana finally spoke, defensive and defiant. "I still think we did the right thing. Better safe than sorry. In this day and age, you have to be cautious about." Abigail spun to face her, and the fury in her expression made Adriana's words trail off. "Cautious about what? About successful black teenagers? About poor families sacrificing for education? About girls from the South Side having dreams? You saw me sitting quietly, eating a sandwich, minding my own business, and you decided I was suspicious enough to report. You didn't see a straight-A student. You didn't see someone dedicating her weekends to helping families in crisis. You didn't see a daughter trying to make her mother proud. You saw a stereotype, and you weaponized it against me." The words hung in the air like an indictment, which is exactly what they were. Abigail had spent months in courtrooms, learning about evidence and testimony and justice. She knew how to build a case, and she had just built an airtight one against everyone in this room. No one could meet her eyes. No one had a response that wouldn't sound like exactly what it was, excuse-making for prejudice. While the people in that small room struggled with their shame and discomfort, something else was happening outside. One of the passengers who had been waiting near gate 23, a woman named Aisha Williams, had witnessed the entire confrontation from the beginning. She had seen Adriana pointing at Abigail and making accusations. She had seen the security officers escort the teenager away. She had seen the police arrive. And she had recorded most of it on her phone. Now, sitting at the gate, Aisha was uploading the video to her social media accounts with a detailed caption explaining what she had witnessed: a black teenager being detained, questioned, and humiliated while white passengers walked by without a second glance. Within minutes, the video began to spread. Within an hour, it would be viral. But Abigail didn't know that yet. She was still in the interrogation room, finally checking her phone as it buzzed repeatedly. 15 missed calls from her mother. 30 text messages. Voicemails piling up. Ada had finally gotten off her shift and seen the emergency messages Abigail had managed to send between questioning sessions. Now she was frantic, calling repeatedly, desperate to know if her daughter was safe. Abigail's hands shook as she called her mother back, and the moment Ada answered, the dam broke. She sobbed into the phone, trying to explain what had happened, the words tumbling out in a jumbled, tearful rush. Ada's voice came through the phone loud enough for everyone in the room to hear, and she was furious. They did what? They accused you of what? Put one of them on the phone right now. Right now. Adam, the police officer, reluctantly took Abigail's phone, identifying himself. What followed was a verbal assault that made everyone in the room wince. Ada, normally soft-spoken and deferential, unleashed years of pent-up frustration and fear. You detained my daughter without cause. You interrogated a minor without a parent present. You accused her of crimes she didn't commit. She's 17. She has rights. I'm calling every lawyer I can find, I'm calling the ACLU, I'm calling the NAACP, and I'm calling every news station in Chicago. Ada demanded to speak with supervisors, with airport management, with anyone in authority. She threatened lawsuits, discrimination complaints, and public exposure. And she had every right to be angry. Aiden, the airline supervisor, realizing the situation was spiraling toward a public relations disaster and potential legal liability, tried to de-escalate. Ma'am, I understand your concern. There has been a misunderstanding, and we sincerely apologize. Your daughter is free to go, and will ensure she makes her flight. But when Abigail looked at the clock, her heart sank. Her flight had departed 7 minutes ago. She had missed it. Everything she had worked for, everything her mother had sacrificed for, gone. She can't make her flight, Abigail said hollowly. It already left. Aiden pulled out his tablet, typing rapidly. We'll book you on the next available flight to San Francisco. There's one departing at. He checked, 8:45 tonight. It arrives at San Francisco at 11:30 p.m. local time. Abigail did the math in her head. Even if the flight left on time, even if there were no delays, she wouldn't arrive at Stanford until well after midnight. The opening session of the Future Legal Minds program started at 8 a.m. the next morning, and she would need to get from the airport to campus, find her assigned housing, check in, and somehow function on zero sleep. It was possible, barely, but it was nothing like the calm, prepared arrival she had planned. Abel, desperate to salvage something from this debacle, offered. We'll upgrade you to first class at no charge, and provide meal vouchers for the wait. The offer felt insulting, a band-aid on a gunshot wound. Abigail looked at him with contempt. I don't want your vouchers. I want an apology. A real one. From everyone who treated me like I was less than human. Abel opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. We were just doing our jobs. Following procedures. Abigail's eyes flashed. Your procedures are broken. Your assumptions are broken. Your training is broken. Because nothing about what happened here today should be considered acceptable procedure. Aiden, trying to take control of the situation, spoke with practiced corporate smoothness. Miss Thompson, on behalf of the airline, I apologize for any distress this situation may have caused. We will conduct a thorough review of how this incident was handled, and appropriate corrective action will be taken. Abigail wasn't fooled by the corporate speak. Appropriate corrective action. What does that mean? A memo? A training session? Because I've seen this script before in court cases. Companies apologize, promise to do better, and then nothing actually changes. She was right, and everyone in the room knew it. But before anyone could respond, there was a knock at the door. Another airline employee poked her head in, looking uncomfortable. Mr. Walsh. I need to speak with you. It's urgent. Aiden stepped out, and through the briefly open door, Abigail could see a crowd had gathered in the gate area. People were looking at their phones, talking animatedly, pointing toward the room. When Aiden returned 2 minutes later, his face was pale. We have a situation. A video of this incident has been posted online and is gaining significant attention. We're receiving calls from media outlets. He looked at Abigail with something between concern and calculation, probably wondering if she had orchestrated this somehow. But Abigail had no idea what he was talking about. She had been too occupied with being interrogated to think about documentation. What she didn't know yet was that Aisha's video had already been shared thousands of times. The hashtag Justice for Abigail was beginning to trend. Civil rights organizations were taking notice. Prominent lawyers were offering pro bono representation. Local and national news outlets were requesting interviews. A story that had started as a quiet injustice in an airport corridor was becoming a public reckoning with racial profiling in American travel. And the people who had dismissed, doubted, and detained Abigail were about to face consequences they had never anticipated. Another person entered the room then, a black woman in her 40s wearing jeans and a travel-worn jacket, carrying a small rolling suitcase. This was Aisha Williams, the woman who had recorded everything. She looked directly at Abigail. "I saw what they did to you. I recorded it. And I posted it because people need to see. People need to know this is still happening." Abigail didn't know whether to thank her or to feel mortified that her humiliation was now public. But Aisha continued, "Don't let them make this go away quietly. Don't let them sweep it under the rug with vouchers and empty apologies. What happened to you matters. Your story matters." Another passenger, a white man in his 60s named Alan Richardson, appeared behind Aisha. "I was on your flight from Chicago. I saw how that flight attendant treated you, how that woman accused you of trying to steal from her. It was disgraceful then, and this is disgraceful now. I'll testify to what I witnessed if it helps." More people began to speak up, passengers who had noticed, who had been uncomfortable, who had known something was wrong but hadn't known how to intervene. The solidarity was unexpected and overwhelming, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Abigail felt less alone. But support from strangers, while meaningful, didn't undo the harm. Abigail looked at the officials who had put her through this ordeal and said clearly, making sure her words were heard and understood, "I want everything that happened here documented. Every word, every action. I want names, badge numbers, employee IDs. Because I'm not letting this go. People need to know what happens when you're black in America, even when you've done everything right, even when you have perfect grades and a perfect record and are trying to achieve something meaningful. People need to know that none of that matters if the people in power decide you don't belong." She pointed to the camera mounted in the corner of the ceiling, the security camera that had been recording everything. "All of this is on tape. And if that footage mysteriously disappears, if this incident gets buried in bureaucracy, then everyone will know exactly what kind of system we're dealing with." It was a challenge, direct and unflinching, from a 17-year-old to adults with authority. And none of them had a response that didn't sound like capitulation or excuse. Abigail Thompson, honor student and youth advocate, had just given them all a lesson in accountability that they would not soon forget. The evening flight to San Francisco was nothing like the morning's nightmare. True to Aiden's promise, Abigail was seated in first class, row 2, window seat. The cabin was spacious and quiet, a world away from the cramped economy section where Adelaide had made her feel so unwelcome. But the upgrade felt hollow, compensation that couldn't undo the hours of humiliation. She settled into the wide leather seat, placed her battered backpack in the space in front of her, and tried to process everything that had happened. Her mind was a chaos of emotions, anger, exhaustion, sadness, and a strange, numb disbelief that this had actually occurred. A flight attendant approached, a black woman in her mid-30s with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Her name tag read Amy Patterson. Amy knelt beside Abigail's seat so they were at eye level and spoke softly. "I heard about what happened at the gate. Word travels fast among crew. I'm so sorry you went through that. Nobody should be treated that way." There was genuine compassion in her voice, and Abigail felt her carefully constructed composure crack slightly. Amy continued, "If you need anything during this flight, anything at all, you just let me know. And I mean anything, water, food, blankets, or just someone to talk to." As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, Amy brought Abigail a meal even though she hadn't asked for one, pasta with vegetables, a side salad, warm bread, and a dessert. "You need to eat," Amy said simply. You've had a terrible day, and you have a big event tomorrow. You need your strength. The kindness, small and practical, meant more than any corporate apology. Later, when most passengers had fallen asleep, Amy returned and sat in the empty seat beside Abigail. They talked in whispers, two black women sharing experiences of navigating spaces that often felt hostile to their existence. Amy told stories about passengers who had refused her service because of her race, about being followed in airport employee areas by security who assumed she didn't belong, about the constant low-level stress of proving she deserved to be where she was. It never really stops, Amy said quietly. You just learn to carry it better. Abigail shared about her work at the juvenile court, about the families she helped, about seeing how systemic prejudice operated at every level. That's why I want to be a lawyer, she explained. To fight this. To change this. To make sure other kids don't have to go through what I went through today. While they talked, Abigail's phone continued to buzz with notifications. Her social media mentions had exploded. The video Aisha posted had been viewed over 2 million times. News outlets were calling it another example of flying while black, drawing comparisons to other high-profile incidents of racial profiling. Prominent civil rights attorneys had publicly offered to represent Abigail if she chose to pursue legal action. A U.S. senator had tweeted about the incident, calling it unacceptable and emblematic of the systemic biases that persist in our public institutions. The hashtag Justice for Abigail was trending nationally. People were sharing their own stories of discrimination in travel, creating a flood of testimony about the daily indignities faced by black travelers. But Abigail wasn't ready to process all of that yet. She turned off her phone's notifications and tried to rest, though sleep was impossible. When the plane finally began its descent into San Francisco, she looked out the window at the lights of the Bay Area spread below like scattered stars. Somewhere down there was Stanford, was her future, was everything she had been working toward. She had made it, barely, despite everything that had tried to stop her. Ainsley Martin, a Stanford program coordinator, was waiting at the baggage claim with a handwritten sign bearing Abigail's name. Ainsley was a white woman in her early 50s with graying hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing Stanford-branded clothing and an expression of genuine concern. The moment she saw Abigail, she rushed forward and, after a moment's hesitation, pulled the exhausted teenager into a hug. "Oh sweetheart, we heard what happened. I'm so sorry. That should never have happened to you." The sympathy, combined with exhaustion and stress, finally broke through Abigail's defenses, and she cried on this stranger's shoulder in the middle of the airport while travelers walked past with curious glances. In the car during the hour-long drive to Palo Alto, Ainsley explained that the Stanford program directors had seen the viral video and had immediately reached out to the airline to express their outrage. "We don't tolerate discrimination of any kind," Ainsley said firmly. "And the fact that one of our future Legal Minds participants was treated that way while traveling to our program? Unacceptable. The university's legal team is already looking into it." She also told Abigail that the first day schedule had been adjusted slightly. "You're not expected at the opening session at 8. We've arranged for you to join at 10:30 after you've had a chance to sleep, shower, and eat properly. Your well-being matters more than punctuality." They arrived at Stanford's campus after 1 in the morning. The grounds were quiet and beautiful, old trees and classical architecture illuminated by soft pathway lighting. Ainsley helped Abigail get settled in her assigned dorm room, a small but comfortable space with a desk, bed, and a view of a courtyard. "Try to get some sleep," Ainsley said gently. "Tomorrow is a new day, and this is your time to shine." After she left, Abigail sat on the edge of the bed, too wired to sleep despite her exhaustion. She thought about her mother, alone in their apartment in Chicago, probably awake with worry. She sent a text, "I'm here. I'm safe. I love you. We made it." The next morning, Abigail attended the opening session of the Future Legal Minds program at 10:30 as arranged. She had managed about 4 hours of sleep, showered, and dressed in her nicest outfit. A simple black skirt, white blouse, and the only pair of dress shoes she owned. When she entered the large auditorium where the session was being held, she expected to quietly slip into a back row seat. Instead, something unexpected happened. The 200 students and faculty members already assembled noticed her arrival, and spontaneously, they stood. They stood and they applauded, a standing ovation that lasted nearly a minute. Abigail froze in the doorway, overwhelmed and confused, until Ainsley gently guided her to a reserved seat in the front row. Justice Alana Grant, a California Supreme Court justice and the day's keynote speaker, was at the podium. She waited for the applause to fade, then spoke directly to Abigail. "Yesterday, one of our brightest participants faced an injustice that no one should ever experience. Abigail Thompson was profiled, detained, and humiliated simply because of the color of her skin and the assumptions people made about her. But she didn't break. She stood tall, presented her truth with dignity, and reminded everyone in that airport that accomplishments and character cannot be erased by prejudice." Justice Grant paused, letting her words sink in. "Abigail, would you please stand?" Abigail rose shakily to her feet, feeling hundreds of eyes on her, but these looks were different from yesterday's. These were looks of respect, solidarity, and welcome. Justice Grant continued, "This is why we do what we do. This is why the legal system desperately needs diverse voices, strong voices, voices that understand injustice firsthand because they have lived it. Abigail represents the future of American jurisprudence, and I, for one, cannot wait to see what she accomplishes. Welcome to Stanford, Abigail. Welcome home." The applause resumed, even louder this time, and Abigail couldn't stop the tears from flowing. But these were different tears, tears of relief and validation and hope. A young woman sitting beside her, Alba Martinez, a black student from New York City, squeezed her hand. "You made it," Alba whispered. "Against everything they threw at you, you made it." And in that moment, in that auditorium full of future lawyers and advocates, Abigail finally felt what she had been denied at the airport. She felt seen, believed, and valued for exactly who she was. 3 months passed, months filled with intensive learning, late-night study sessions, and the formation of friendships that would last a lifetime. Abigail completed the Stanford Future Legal Minds program with the highest marks in her cohort. Her final presentation, a detailed analysis of racial bias in the juvenile justice system, earned praise from every faculty member who heard it. On the last day of the program, she received news that would change her life. A full scholarship to Stanford University, covering not just tuition but also room, board, and living expenses for 4 years. The scholarship was worth over $300,000, and it was hers. When she called her mother with the news, Ada sobbed so hard she couldn't speak for 5 minutes. But Abigail's story had also sparked consequences beyond her personal success. The viral video had forced a reckoning. The airline conducted an internal investigation, and the results were made public under pressure from civil rights organizations. Abel Harrison, the gate agent who had first accused Abigail, was terminated for violations of company policy and discrimination protocols. Aidan Walsh, the supervisor who had threatened to report her to the FBI, was demoted and required to complete 100 hours of mandatory bias training. Aaron, the flight attendant who had treated her poorly on the first flight, received an official reprimand and was removed from his position. The airline issued a formal public apology and committed $100,000 to scholarship funds for students from underrepresented communities. Adriana Mitchell, the woman who had started the entire nightmare by reporting Abigail to airport staff, faced different consequences. Her identity had been revealed through social media investigation, and the backlash was swift and severe. Her employer, after reviewing the video and the public reaction, terminated her employment, citing behavior inconsistent with company values. Adriana never apologized, never acknowledged wrongdoing, and eventually deleted all her social media accounts to escape the criticism. But her name would forever be associated with the incident, a cautionary tale about the dangers of acting on prejudice. The airport security officers, Abraham and Adelaide, kept their positions but were required to undergo comprehensive training on implicit bias, cultural competency, and appropriate response protocols. The Denver Airport Police Department implemented new policies requiring documented justification before detaining minors and mandating that parents be contacted immediately in any case involving travelers under 18. These were small changes, perhaps insufficient, but they were changes nonetheless, tiny steps toward a more just system. Abigail returned to Chicago during her break, walking into her mother's arms and staying there for several minutes, neither of them speaking, both of them crying. They sat in their small apartment, the new television Ada had purchased with her first full paycheck in years playing quietly in the background, and Abigail told her mother everything. Not just the facts, but the feelings, the fear, the anger, the humiliation, and finally, the triumph. Ada listened, holding her daughter's hand, occasionally wiping tears from her eyes. "I'm so proud of you," Ada said finally. "Not because you won, but because you didn't let them make you small. You stood up. You spoke truth. That's all I ever wanted for you." Before returning to Stanford, Abigail went back to the Cook County Juvenile Court, where she had worked as a youth advocate. Judge Aileen Morrison greeted her with a fierce hug and immediately asked her to speak to the new cohort of young advocates starting their training. Abigail stood before a group of 15 teenagers, all of them bright and ambitious, most of them from backgrounds similar to hers. She told them her story, not to discourage them but to prepare them. "The world will doubt you," she said. "People will make assumptions based on how you look, where you come from, how much money your family has. They will question whether you earned your achievements or whether you got lucky. They will sometimes treat you like you don't belong in spaces you absolutely deserve to occupy." She paused, looking at each young face. "But here's what I learned. Their doubt doesn't define you. Their assumptions don't limit you. And their prejudice? That's their failure, not yours. You carry your truth with you everywhere you go. And when the moment comes, when someone demands proof of your worth, you show them not because you owe them, but because you owe yourself. You show them what they refuse to see. And then you keep going, keep rising, keep proving that you belong everywhere you choose to be." Later that week, Abigail was assigned to a new case, a 14-year-old black girl named Aaliyah who had been accused of shoplifting from a downtown clothing store. The store's security footage told a different story than the one the security guard had reported. Aaliyah had never taken anything. She had simply been browsing, looking at price tags, trying things on, and putting them back. But the security guard, making assumptions based on Aaliyah's race and neighborhood, had followed her through the store, accused her of theft, and called the police. The charges were baseless, but Aaliyah had still been arrested, detained, and was now facing juvenile court proceedings that could affect her for years. Abigail sat with Aaliyah before the hearing, seeing herself reflected in this frightened girl's eyes. "I believe you," Abigail said simply. "I know what it's like to be accused of something you didn't do. I know what it's like when people look at you and see only what they expect to see, not who you actually are." Aaliyah started crying. "Nobody ever believes me," she whispered. "Teachers, cops, store workers, even some of my own family. They all think I'm trouble." Abigail squeezed her hand. "I believe you. And I'm going to make sure the judge hears the truth." In court, Abigail presented the security footage, pointed out the inconsistencies in the guard's testimony, and argued passionately for dismissal of all charges. Judge Morrison listened carefully, asked pointed questions, and ultimately ruled in Aaliyah's favor, expunging the arrest from her record and ordering the store to review their security protocols. When they left the courtroom, Aaliyah threw her arms around Abigail. "Thank you for fighting for me. Thank you for seeing me." Abigail hugged her back, remembering all the people who had fought for her, who had seen her. "That's what we do," she said. "We fight for each other. We see each other. And we don't let the system break us." 1 year later, Abigail began her freshman year at Stanford University. Her dorm room in one of the historic residence halls overlooked a courtyard where students gathered to study, talk, and dream. On her desk, she kept 2 items in places of honor. The first was her Cook County Juvenile Court ID card, the piece of plastic that had saved her at the Denver airport, the proof that she was exactly who she claimed to be. The second was a photograph of her and her mother taken on the morning she left Chicago for the first time, both of them smiling through tears, Ada's hand on Abigail's cheek, love and hope radiating from the image. Her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Aaliyah, the girl she had represented in court. "Hey Abigail. I got accepted to college. Northern Illinois University gave me a scholarship for criminal justice. I want to be a youth advocate like you. Thank you for showing me I could do this." Abigail smiled, tears pricking her eyes as she typed back, "I always knew you could. Now go change the world. And remember, when they doubt you, when they try to make you small, you stand tall and show them the truth. You belong everywhere you choose to be." She set her phone down and looked out the window at the Stanford campus, at the students of every background hurrying to classes and activities, at the palm trees swaying in the California breeze, at the future stretching out before her like an open road. She thought about that day in Denver, about the interrogation room, about the officials who had assumed the worst about her. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, to believing their narrative instead of her own. And she thought about every girl like her, every black teenager who would face similar prejudice, who would be doubted and dismissed and disrespected simply for existing in spaces others decided they didn't belong. Sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom. Sometimes it comes from a 17-year-old girl who refused to let prejudice define her, who stood in the face of humiliation and said, "I am more than your assumptions." Abigail's story didn't end at that Denver airport. It began there. Every day since, she has proven that the most powerful weapon against injustice is the unwavering belief that you deserve to be seen for who you truly are. And every person she helps, every case she takes, every student she mentors becomes another chapter in a story that started with one word: dignity. The dignity to demand respect. The dignity to stand firm in truth. The dignity to transform pain into purpose. That is Abigail's legacy. That is her gift to the world. And that is why her story will continue long after the viral videos fade and the headlines move on. Now I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, have you or someone you know ever experienced discrimination like this? Do you think the consequences for those airline staff were enough, or should there have been more accountability? Type number 1 if you believe we need better training and stricter policies to prevent racial profiling in airports and other public spaces. And here's what I really want to know: what would you have done if you witnessed what happened to Abigail? Would you have spoken up, recorded it, or stayed silent? Your answer matters because change happens when people refuse to look away. ***. If Abigail's courage inspired you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel because we share stories of resilience, justice, and people who refuse to be broken by systems designed to keep them down. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, someone who has ever been made to feel like they don't belong. And drop a comment telling me what story you want to hear next. Should we talk about more cases of racial profiling? Stories of people overcoming incredible odds? Or accounts of everyday heroes standing up for what's right? Thank you for watching, for listening, and for caring about stories like Abigail's. Remember that every time you speak up against injustice, every time you believe someone's truth instead of judging by appearances, every time you stand with the vulnerable instead of the powerful, you're writing a better future for all of us. Stay strong, stay hopeful, and never forget that you belong everywhere you have the courage to go. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. This story teaches us profound lessons about prejudice and perseverance in modern America. First, it reveals how implicit bias operates even among people who believe they're simply following procedures. The airline staff and security officers didn't see themselves as discriminatory, yet every decision they made was filtered through racial assumptions. They questioned Abigail's credentials not because of evidence, but because her appearance didn't match their expectations of who belongs in prestigious programs. Second, the story demonstrates that excellence and achievement don't shield black individuals from suspicion. Despite perfect grades, national recognition, and official court credentials, Abigail was still treated as guilty until proven innocent. This reveals a harsh reality: success doesn't erase stereotypes in the eyes of those who refuse to see beyond skin color. Third, we learn the importance of documentation and witnesses. The viral video transformed a private injustice into public accountability, proving that visibility matters in fighting systemic discrimination. Fourth, Abigail's experience shows us that dignity cannot be taken, only disrespected. She maintained her composure, presented her truth, and refused to internalize the shame others tried to impose on her. Finally, this story reminds us that individual acts of prejudice reflect broader systemic problems requiring institutional change. One person's courage can spark necessary conversations about bias training, policy reform, and accountability measures. The question isn't whether discrimination exists, it's whether we'll stand against it when we witness it happening. What would you have done if you saw Abigail being detained and interrogated? Would you have recorded it like Aisha did, or would you have intervened directly? Drop a comment sharing your thoughts. Have you or someone you love ever been profiled because of race? Tell your story below, because every voice matters in this conversation. If you believe no teenager should ever be treated the way Abigail was treated, show your support by hitting that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories about resilience, justice, and people who refuse to let prejudice define them. Turn on notifications so you never miss when we share these important narratives. And please, share this video with your friends, family, and social networks, because stories like Abigail's need to reach beyond this screen. They need to spark conversations at dinner tables, in classrooms, and in boardrooms where policies get made. Thank you for watching, for listening, and for caring enough to stay until the end. Your engagement tells platforms that these stories matter, that racial justice matters, that black lives and black dignity matter. I appreciate every single one of you who took time from your day to witness Abigail's journey. May her courage inspire you to stand up, speak out, and fight for a world where everyone is judged by their character and achievements, not by the color of their skin. Stay blessed, stay strong, and keep fighting the good fight. Until next time, remember that change begins with awareness, continues with action, and succeeds when good people refuse to stay silent.